I'm Father Christopher, and I am really the product of the history of what's happened to me up until now, which began, obviously, like everybody else, being sent off to school. And I went to a rattle of schools. I was at 5 different schools, which probably has had a profound effect on my the way I relate to people, because I was actually never at any one school for more than 3 years. And they were interesting experiences. And I ended up, having gone through a rattle of schools, as I say, in Ampleforth in Yorkshire, having a very, very interesting time dealing with, I suppose, what would be called a 1960s version of racism. And that was a whole experience, being Irish in England at that time. But I have to say, I worked my way through it to the extent that I found the monks in Ampleforth the most wonderful people I have ever had to deal with. Wonderful friends who taught me about being a human being, and I can't thank them enough. And from there, I came home to Dublin, to university, where I really came to discover my family. I was living at home for 3 years and discovered my father, who became really my closest friend. Ours was a very academic house because my father was a professor of philology and my elder brother was professor of philosophy and blah, blah, blah. But we lived a very, very happy life in relatively comfortable circumstances, surrounded by animals and fields and beautiful gardens and a lot of hard work, but great fun. And we were all very much involved. And really it was sort of further to all of that my father decided that, having come back to university here in Ireland, that I would, because I was talking about joining the monastery, he was trying to seduce me away from that. And he suggested that I go to Cambridge for a while. And it was really his last throw of the dice to seduce me away from monastic nonsense to the excitements of academic life. And I had all sorts of prospects of going to Vienna to study with the great scholars of Irish monastic history and the rest of it, which was the area I was interested in. Anyway, I went to Cambridge, had a wonderful time, mostly dancing and skating on the fens and really enjoying being in my 20s. And that was great fun. And then from there, I applied for a job teaching in a school in Ireland. That was a very, very interesting experience, further to which I came to the monastery here in 1970 at the tender age of 22, where I was viewed with some disapproval as a late vocation. That proved to be a very interesting time for me, working in the school a little bit, and that was an interesting experience. I was teaching, gosh, everything really, from history, Latin, French. I even taught some Irish, which was a bit of a joke, but it was fun. And the boys were great. It was a whole experience for me. Then the big excitement was to go away to study theology in Rome. I thought Rome felt a bit churchy and clerical, and I wasn't so sure about it. But once I got there, I realized that Rome was a vast, wonderful, pagan city. And I really enjoyed that. The art, the archaeology were immediately what interested me. I was living in an international monastery called Sant'Anselmo, which in itself was hugely interesting, meeting monks from all over the world, from Vietnam to Canada. And I made many very, very good friends there. That came to an end when I was ordained in Subiaco, which was a wonderful experience, most beautiful, beautiful place. That whole Italian experience involving learning Italian and learning a lot about Gregorian chant and having the opportunity to sing and perform at concerts. All of that was very interesting. And anyhow, ordained, then I came back here to the, I suppose, humdrum life of earning my living in the school, teaching and house mastering, except that I got TB immediately within months of being ordained, and that meant there was a sort of an interruption. I was went off to Switzerland, which was fun. Sat on an Alp for a couple of months, and then came back to take up where I'd left off, teaching and house mastering. And then I spent, after 5 years of house mastering, the abbot of the day asked me if I would look after the novices here, which was an interesting, very, very different experience, obviously. And that brings me back here again through the late 80s. I spent another short spell house mastering in the school before I went to Nigeria. And I have to say, it was the most wonderful experience of my life to date. Living in the jungle at a level of basic survival which I could not have imagined. And it was an amusement to me to discover afterwards that until I had arrived at the monastery out there, they thought that all white men had white hair. They had never met a white man with black hair, which I had at the time. It was sort of strangely innocent aspects to life like that, which were made it wonderful out there. Anyway, I came home after 2 years, having been quite sick, really. I came back with typhoid and malaria and dysentery, weighing about 50 kilos. That brought me back here in 1992, when the abbot of the day told me that he wanted to make me prior. And immediately as prior, I had to try and arrange for the election of a new abbot. And I arranged that so badly that I ended up being elected myself. And that was the beginning of a whole new chapter for me. Suddenly, I was in charge of a community. And not just the community, but the school. And then I discovered, to my horror, I was also in charge of Ewu, of the monastery in Nigeria. And it was the being in charge of all these things was a big deal for me, all of a sudden. And suddenly having to inform myself on all the issues. And I had a series of very interesting encounters, helped by very, very kind people. Firstly, an Australian lady in Limerick, who ended up giving me £500,000, which enabled us to start building this guest house that we're in. And in the end, one person brought another to visit us, and one of these people who was brought along has ended up enabling me to finish the guest house, to build a library, practically to build a new monastery. So a lot of stuff has happened, and it's been great fun, and light years away from what I expected to find in the monastery as life as a monk. But as I say, 50 years later, I'm still upright and looking forward to a few more years. I've been, since I retired as abbot in 2008 after a second term, which has involved 16 years altogether. And since then, I've been guestmaster, teaching a little bit in the school and looking after the orchard in the garden. And between one thing and another, it adds up to a reasonably healthy lifestyle.